This stuff is wild in the sense that people don't really geographically locate Iran and realize that, for instance, the obsession with the Zionist entity with Israel, they don't share a border with Israel. There's no common concerns with Israel. But there is a singular obsession with Israel in America. They pretend to be mad about the 1953 coup that overthrew Mossadegh, in which the Ayatollahs were involved in overthrowing Mossadegh. They didn't like the liberalism of Mossadegh. What is it that drives Iran beyond the sort of millenarian Shia Islam that we all know about? I mean, is there an overarching goal? I mean, I hear about the hidden imam, which I'm sure you know about and this stuff. What is it about the mullahs and the leadership that kind of motivate them?
So there are two things that are hugely significant about what you just raised. And I think it's hugely significant, especially for those who say, what has Iran got to do with us? It's over there, Well, I think the first thing to remember about what has Iran got to do with us is that during the encampments on university campuses, we saw the students who were protesting wave the flags of Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. That's what Iran has got to do with you.
I saw it in a park in New York. Yeah.
You saw it?
I saw someone in a park in New York with a Hezbollah flag.
Right. So I don't know why people don't seem to make the connection that if your children in colleges are waving the flag of Hezbollah, it means that Iran's number one aspiration from 1979 onward to export its revolution has partially succeeded. Mm-hmm. But to go back to your question about Shiism, Ayatollah Khomeini was still in Iran in the early 60s when he began giving his very fiery sermons. And I should mention that Ayatollah Khomeini became the leader that finally led the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and which toppled.
And he was exiled to Paris.
He was exiled to Paris at some point. He was initially exiled to Iraq, and then Iraq threw him out, and he had to go to France, and he was in France in the late 70s before returning to Iraq.
It's amazing that the French take him, but the Iraqis won't.
The Iraqis took him for a while, but then they had to get rid of him. So this is, I think, a brilliant formula that he happened upon, which I think is the formula that somehow got reproduced here in the West and in our country, in the United States, which is that in the very early 60s, he was very young. He was kind of trying out to see what inflames people to kind of stir them and bring them together. And so in the beginning, he was just talking about the moral corruption of the monarchy, and how by allowing women to take off their Islamic dress code and take jobs and go into get out of the house and work, they had caused the moral corruption of an Islamic society. So he kept talking about that, and he wasn't gathering momentum. He had his own constituents. He had very religious conservatives who agreed with him, but that was a very tiny portion of the entire country, and he wanted more. He was far more ambitious. So at some point, for some reason, he changed his tune, and he, rather than focus on women, he started talking about the American imperialists and its bastard child, Israel. Mm-hmm. And the moment his sermons moved from the issue of the moral corruption and the women and their uncovered hair and short skirts to imperialist America that is oppressing us and the blood-sucking Zionists, all of a sudden he gathered momentum. And a lot of the
Don't mind the short skirts, but we hate the Americans. That was the play. Lord.
You mentioned the Tudeh Party, Iran's Communist Party.
yeah.
This was manna
This
from
is
heaven
manna,
for them.
yeah.
And so
The
if-
language they spoke, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what was very ironic was that Khomeini was adapting all of the communist rhetoric into his own religious language, but they were copies, exact copies of the originals. So in other words, the proletariat became the downtrodden in a very Persian sort of terminology. Then the bourgeois became the mustakbarin, which was also the equivalent, and so all of a sudden a lot of the young, educated leftist Iranians started to pay attention, and all of a sudden he went from being this backward guy who was just talking about women to this potentially national figure. Now, the reason I think this is important is because this is precisely what has happened since October 7th. You see, LGBTQ, super radical lefty, university students or otherwise get together with Islamists on the streets of London and elsewhere. And whether this is happening, organically or by accident, the legacy is the legacy of Khomeini.
It's an amazingly good point. I mean, it's, the revolutionary language was the language of the 60s and the 70s.
Yes.
And to speak that language was to attract people. And particularly when you see like the radicals in Germany, for instance, the big push of that movement was when the Shah came to
It was
Berlin.
it
was all about the Shah.
yeah.
It was obsession with the Shah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was all the communist rhetoric,
Yeah.
but Islamicized. So he was brilliant. He was very smart. He realized that this is what sells. He couldn't say proletariat and
Yeah, of
bourgeois, but he understood that the concepts were appealing and sexy, and so he adapted it into an Islamic form. But the second thing that that I think is very relevant and important is that think about what that guy Khomeini was trying to do. He, it's early 60s. He wants to lead. He's hugely ambitious, and he wants to make his mark on the world of Islam. But he's Iranian. He doesn't speak Arabic, and he's a Shia, which means that all the other Muslims in the world are Sunnis, the overwhelming majority. And this guy, with all of his ambitions, happened to be born in this culture that belongs to a minority within a minority. He's a Shiite, a Persian-speaking Muslim. So how is he going to make his mark on the Muslim world? And I believe that he adopts the cause of Palestinians to make his mark. Because the moment he becomes the champion of the Palestinian cause, the moment he is the guy who, unlike the King of Jordan or unlike Anwar Sadat, is going to remain uncompromising to the death, is the moment he appears to be the savior of all the downtrodden Muslims everywhere.
In bridging that Sunni-Shia gap.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, because it is really remarkable when you think about it, how did this guy who was leading, a revolution in a Shiite country, amid a Sunni ocean, right, manage to become so important?
It was the Palestinian cause.
It was a Palestinian cause. It gave him the identity of an Islamic prophetic savior. And you know this history well enough to know that he was no longer just an Ayatollah Khomeini. Immediately, around 1978, 1979, people started to refer to him as an imam, Imam Khomeini, which meant that they had risen him from the rank of, a cleric to the rank of a saint. And that's how he became who became. He became the savior.